The company's been sold. Your share comes to $10,000. For a second, I honestly thought I was still numb from grief and had misunderstood him. The words hung in the air of my late husband's study, sharp and wrong, like they didn't belong in a room that still smelled faintly of old books and bergamot tea. I didn't look up at my son right away. Instead, I let my fingers trace the edge of the oak desk where his father had worked for decades, the surface worn smooth by late nights, coffee cups, and impossible decisions. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Could you repeat that?" My voice was steady. That surprised even me. At 68, I'd learned how to sound calm when everything inside me was breaking apart. 3 weeks ago, I buried my husband. A week after that, I stopped waking up expecting to hear him in the kitchen. And now this. My son, Caleb, cleared his throat and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. "It is all documented, Mom." The sale went through quickly but cleanly. 10,000 is what you're entitled to? 10,000. I finally looked up at him. He was standing straight, confident, wearing a tailored jacket his father would have found excessive. His fingernails were neat, manicured. Not a trace of the grease and calluses that once defined the hands that helped build the business he now spoke about so casually. "For my share," I repeated. "Yes," he said, nodding. "Your share." Your share. As if the company had never been mine to begin with. As if I hadn't been there when it was nothing more than a rented garage outside Spokane and a stack of unpaid invoices. As if I hadn't balanced books at the kitchen table while raising a child and keeping a roof over our heads. He folded the paper slowly and slid it into my cardigan pocket. "And who bought the company?" I asked. "Another manufacturing group?" Caleb hesitated, just for a heartbeat. "A private investment firm. Northbridge Capital." Northbridge Capital. I felt something click into place, quiet and precise. "I don't recall your father mentioning them," I said. "It was a recent development," he replied quickly. "They approached us shortly before that, before everything happened. The timing wasn't ideal, but the offer was solid. Operations will continue. Employees are safe." It's what Dad would have wanted. Would it? I thought of the last coherent thing my husband had whispered in the hospital, his voice raw with urgency. "Kimberly, promise me you'll watch everything. Something's off." At the time, I blamed the medication. Now I wasn't so sure. "When will I meet the new owners?" I asked. Caleb blinked. "There's really no need for that. I've handled the transition. You just need to sign the acknowledgement of payment and focus on settling into your new situation." My new situation. Widowed. Displaced. Reduced to a line item. Before he could say anything else, I stood. "My name is Kimberly," I said calmly, more to myself than to him. "I've been married for 46 years. I helped build a business most people never believed in, and I didn't survive this long by accident." Relief flickered across his face. He thought I was conceding. As he turned to leave, I asked one last question. "Who runs Northbridge Capital?" He shrugged. "Some woman. Evelyn Wright, I think." I smiled. After he left, I returned to the desk, unlocked the hidden drawer only my husband and I knew about, and removed a slim leather folder. Inside were incorporation papers for Northbridge Capital. Sole owner, Kimberly. My son had just sold his father's company straight back to me, and he had absolutely no idea. The silence after Caleb left felt heavier than the conversation itself. I stayed in the study for a long time, long after his car pulled out of the driveway. The house still carried my husband's rhythm, his chair slightly angled away from the desk and the faint indentation where his elbow always rested, the lamp he insisted on keeping even when it flickered. Everything about the room said permanence, stability, truth, and yet my own son had just tried to erase me from it. I locked the door and sat down, finally allowing my composure to loosen just enough to breathe. Not cry. Not yet. Tears could wait. This required clarity. I opened the leather folder and reviewed the documents again, not because I needed reassurance, but because ritual mattered. Northbridge Capital, incorporated quietly in Delaware. Clean structure. No visible ties to me unless you knew exactly where to look. My name buried beneath layers of legality, exactly the way my husband and I had planned. When he first noticed the discrepancies in the quarterly reports, it hadn't been dramatic at first, just numbers that didn't quite line up. Inventory values slightly inflated. Deferred liabilities quietly shifted. Caleb had been clever, too clever. But clever men often mistake subtlety for invisibility. My phone vibrated. A single text message from Martin Hale. Did he tell you yet? Martin had been my husband's attorney for over 30 years. He was meticulous, ethical to the point of irritation, and one of the few people who knew exactly how much I'd been involved in the business behind the scenes. Yes, I typed back. $10,000? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. I assumed as much. We're still on schedule. Board meeting is Thursday at 9. Are you ready? I looked around the study one more time, my gaze landing on a framed photograph on the bookshelf. My husband and me in our early 30s, standing in front of the first workshop. He was grinning, exhausted. I was holding a ledger, already mid-calculation. I've been ready longer than he realizes, I replied. That night, sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of balance sheets dissolving into sand, of my husband trying to speak but no sound coming out, of Caleb as a child running toward me with open arms, only to turn away at the last second. By morning, the sadness had settled into something sharper. Resolve. I dressed carefully, choosing comfort over appearance for the first time since the funeral. There would be no audience today, just preparation. I spent the morning reviewing internal reports through the secure access my husband had insisted I keep years ago, just in case. That was when I saw it. The pension fund. A slow siphoning. Not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to cover bad investments elsewhere. Caleb hadn't just undervalued the company, he'd been hollowing it out. My hands clenched on the desk. These weren't abstract numbers. These were people. Men and women who had stayed loyal through downturns, who trusted that the company would take care of them the way my husband always promised it would. My phone rang. Kimberly, Martin said without preamble. It's worse than we thought. I know, I replied quietly. I'm looking at it now. A pause. Then softer, are you all right? I considered the question. No, I said honestly. But I'm clear. That afternoon, Caleb called. Mom, we need to talk about the house, he said briskly, like he was scheduling a dentist appointment. The taxes alone, we'll discuss it, I interrupted. Tomorrow. Here. A pause. Here? Yes, I said. My home. He didn't argue. That told me everything. After the call ended, I returned to the study and unlocked a second drawer, one Caleb didn't know existed. Inside was a thin notebook filled with my handwriting. Observations, calculations, dates, patterns. I hadn't stopped paying attention. I'd simply stopped announcing it. By the time evening fell, my grief had transformed into something else entirely. Not rage, not vengeance, purpose. Caleb thought he was managing an estate. He had no idea he was about to face the woman who had helped build it. And this time I wouldn't be standing quietly beside anyone. I would be standing in front. Caleb arrived the next afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock, like he was coming to inspect a property, not to speak to his grieving mother. He didn't come alone. A woman in a fitted blazer and heels sharp enough to cut glass followed him up to my front steps, clutching a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of smile that meant she'd already practiced saying, "This is for your own good?" "Mom," Caleb said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "This is Sloane Parker. She's with Meridian Estates. She specializes in homes like this." Homes like this? As if this place was a category on a spreadsheet. I held out my hand politely. "Sloane. Nice to meet you." Her handshake was cool and fast. "Mrs. Kimberly, it's an honor. Caleb mentioned you were ready to list immediately." I looked at my son. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened a fraction. He hadn't expected me to notice that detail. He'd expected me to nod and smile and follow instructions the way I always had in public. "I don't recall agreeing to that," I said calmly. Sloane's eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to me, recalculating. "Let's give you two a moment," I added, still smiling, but my tone left no room for negotiation. "The living room has water. Please, make yourself comfortable." Sloane hesitated, just long enough to decide she liked her paycheck more than she liked to fight, then walked out, closing the study door behind her. The second the latch clicked, Caleb exhaled hard. "Really?" he snapped. "You're going to embarrass me in front of her?" "Embarrass you?" I repeated. "You brought a real terror to my house without my consent." He threw his hands up like I was being unreasonable. "Mom, this place is too much for you. The maintenance, the taxes, the staff." "The staff?" I cut in softly. "You mean the housekeeper who has been with us for 15 years and cried at your father's funeral?" Caleb's eyes flashed. Don't do that. Don't do what? Turn everything into an emotional performance. He said it the way men do when they want to dismiss a woman without admitting they're scared of her. I took a step closer to the desk. Not toward him, toward the truth. Let's talk about performance, I said. You walked into this room and handed me a document saying my share of your father's company, our company, was worth $10,000. It was a legal distribution, he insisted quickly. The trust gave you authority, I said, not ownership of reality. His mouth tightened. Mom, with all due respect, you were never involved in the business side. There it was, the line he'd rehearsed, the same line he'd likely fed anyone who questioned his decisions, the same line he'd used to make himself feel like a man in control instead of a son panicking because his father's shadow was gone. I nodded slowly. You're right. Relief flickered across his face, fast, greedy. You're right, I repeated, letting the moment stretch. I wasn't involved in the business side. I reached into the top drawer of the desk and pulled out a key. Caleb's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? Something your father taught me, I said quietly. Checking the fine print, I unlocked the hidden compartment beneath the desk's left panel, a feature Caleb had never noticed because he'd never bothered to look for it. Inside was a thick, leather-bound document and a slim stack of files. I placed them on the desk like I was laying down a weapon. This, I said, tapping the leather-bound document, is your father's full estate directive, not the summary you're working from. Caleb stared. Where did you get that? From your father, I replied. Because he didn't trust you. The words landed like a punch. His face shifted through disbelief, anger, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. That's not, he started. It's exactly that, I said, flipping the document open to a marked page. Section 12, paragraph D. This property cannot be sold without my written consent. He blinked like his eyes refused to process what he was reading. I'm the executor, he said weakly. And I'm the required consent, I answered. Executors execute. They don't override. Caleb's cheeks flushed. This is ridiculous. You're grieving. You're confused. I smiled slightly. You're going to call me confused now? I'm trying to protect you. No, I said. The CC boy. You're trying to control me. His gaze darted around the room as if searching for someone else to argue with, someone he could intimidate. But it was just me, in my house, in my husband's study, and I wasn't the version of me he'd counted on. You can't stop this. He wasn't me, say he hissed. There are liabilities you don't understand. Deals I've made. People I owe. Deals I've made. I tilted my head. That sounds like a problem, Caleb. His eyes narrowed. What do you know? I let silence do the work. Finally, he pushed back from the chair and stood, pacing once, like a predator trying to reclaim the room. You think you're being clever, he said, but you have no idea what you're stepping into. I held his gaze. I know exactly what I'm stepping into. Then I walked to the door and opened it. Sloan, I called politely. I appreciate your time, but the house will not be listed. Not now. Not ever without my signature. Sloan looked at Caleb like she'd just realized she'd been hired by the wrong person. Caleb's face went tight. I turned back to him one last time. I'll see you Thursday, I said softly. At the board meeting? His eyes widened. What board meeting? I smiled, warm as honey, sharp as glass. The one where you introduced Northbridge Capital's mysterious owner. And before he could say another word, I added, Please give Evelyn Wright my regards. Then I closed the door on both of them, and for the first time since my husband died, I felt something close to peace. Not because I'd won, because the game had finally become honest. Caleb arrived the next afternoon exactly on time. That alone would have impressed most people. Punctuality, discipline, the outward signs of responsibility. But I knew my son too well to confuse appearances with character. I heard his footsteps before he knocked, measured, confident, already assuming control of the situation. When I opened the door, he gave me the same tight smile he'd worn since the funeral. Polite, efficient, empty. Mom, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Thanks for meeting on short notice. Of course, I replied calmly. This house has hosted far more difficult conversations. He glanced around, eyes flicking over the furniture, the artwork, the framed family photos, not with nostalgia, but with appraisal, as if calculating square footage and resale value. We sat in the study. I deliberately chose my husband's chair. Caleb hesitated before taking the opposite seat, just a fraction of a second. Enough to notice. I'll be direct, he began, folding his hands the way he did in boardrooms. The estate is more complicated than you realize. Maintaining this property isn't practical long-term. I've identified a residential community near Asheville. Top-tier, discreet, excellent healthcare access. 6 hours away. I let him finish. They offer independent living, he continued, with a smooth transition if your needs change. The proceeds from the house sale would more than cover. No, I said. The word landed quietly, cleanly. Caleb blinked. I'm sorry? No, I repeated. I'm not moving. And this house isn't being sold. His jaw tightened. Mom, this isn't about emotions. It's about logistics. Then let's talk logistics, I replied. Specifically, the part of the will you seem to be misunderstanding. His confidence faltered just slightly. I've reviewed the will, he said, extensively. Then you know, I continued, that I retain lifetime residency rights. Any sale of this property requires my written consent. That clause is outdated, he said quickly. Your father intended, I interrupted, that I not be discarded once you decided I was inconvenient. Silence filled the room. For the first time since my husband's death, Caleb looked unsure. That's not fair, he said. I'm trying to protect you. From what? I asked softly. From having a voice? His eyes hardened. Let's not do this emotionally, he said. We have bigger issues. The company transition alone. I said, leaning back. The company. His shoulders squared. There it was. His comfort zone. Northbridge Capital, I continued, watching him closely. Interesting buyer. Caleb relaxed just a little. They moved quickly. Clean deal? You'll appreciate that once everything settles. I already do, I said. He frowned. What do you mean? I mean, I appreciate efficiency, I replied. I also appreciate thoroughness. Due diligence. A pause. I spoke with Martin today, I added casually. Caleb stiffened. Why? Because he's been our attorney longer than you've been an executive, I said. And because he knows things you don't. Like what? Caleb snapped. I didn't answer immediately. I reached into the desk drawer and slid a single document across the table. Northbridge Capital. Incorporation summary. His eyes skimmed it once, then again. Then his face drained of color. This is a joke, he said. This isn't. Northbridge Capital is privately held, I said evenly. Founded 6 months ago. His voice dropped. By who? I met his gaze. By me. The room seemed to tilt. That's not possible, he said. I don't what? I asked. Understand corporate law. Financial structuring? Risk mitigation? I leaned forward. You didn't think I'd notice the missing pension funds, Caleb? Or the shell transfers? Or the valuation discrepancies you assumed I was too grieving to question? His mouth opened. Closed. You sold the company to your own mother, I said calmly. At a discount. Based on figures you manipulated. The silence was suffocating. You plan to strip the intellectual property next, I continued. Move it before the transition finalized. A clever contingency. Unfortunately, your engineering team noticed. He stood abruptly. That's an overreach. You're confused. Grief is... Don't, I warned. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. You do not get to question my clarity after trying to erase me. His anger flared. You set me up. No, I said. You exposed yourself. He paced the room like a trapped animal. You humiliated me, he hissed. In front of the board. You humiliated yourself, I replied, when you chose greed over stewardship. He stopped. What do you want? He demanded. Control. Revenge? I want accountability, I said. And restoration. I stood. The board meets Thursday. You will attend. Not as CEO. His breath hitched. Then as what? As someone willing to learn, I said. Or as someone willing to walk away. He stared at me, disbelief and fury colliding. You'd destroy your own son? I held his gaze. I'd save what your father built, I said. Even if it means forcing you to face who you've become. The fight drained from him, replaced by something else. Fear. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a reckoning. Think carefully, I said, opening the door. Thursday is coming. He left without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it. my hands trembling, not with doubt, but with the weight of what came next. Standing up to the world had been easy. Standing up to my own child, that was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But it was necessary, because love without boundaries had brought us here. Truth, however painful, was the only way forward. Thursday morning arrived without drama. No thunder, no ominous signs, just clear skies and a quiet resolve that settled over me as I dressed. I chose a navy suit my husband had always liked. Simple, tailored, unmistakably authoritative. Not for intimidation, for clarity. This wasn't about revenge. This was about stewardship. When I entered the boardroom, the energy shifted instantly. Conversations faltered. Eyes lifted. People noticed where I sat, at the head of the table. Caleb was already there, seated several places down, no longer at the position of quiet command he'd once occupied full. His posture was rigid, controlled, but his eyes gave him away. He knew this was real now. The board meeting began formally. Reports, summaries, the kind of procedural theater that comforted people who believed systems alone maintained order. Then Martin stood. "Before we proceed," he said calmly, "there is a matter of ownership and governance that requires immediate clarification." He nodded to me. I stood slowly. "My name is Kimberly," I began, my voice steady, unshaken. And before I was anyone's wife or anyone's mother, I was a financial analyst. A ripple moved through the room. For 40 years, I worked beside my husband, quietly, strategically. By choice, I reviewed contracts, flagged risks, structured long-term protections, especially for employees. I paused. When irregularities appeared, we prepared. I gestured to the screen. Northbridge Capital's documents filled the wall. "I'm the sole owner of Northbridge Capital," I said, "which now holds a controlling interest in this company." Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Caleb didn't move. "Let me be clear," I continued. "This acquisition is legal, ethical, and final. What is not acceptable and will be addressed immediately are the actions that made such intervention necessary." Martin distributed the forensic reports. Numbers don't shout, they whisper. But once heard, they can't be ignored. Pension fund misuse, intellectual property diversion, artificial valuation suppression. One by one, board members looked up from the documents and toward Caleb. "This is a misunderstanding," he said finally, his voice controlled but thin. There were pressures, expectations. There were choices I corrected, and those choices endangered people who trusted this company. Silence. Then one board member spoke, then another. Questions turned into conclusions. By the time the vote came, there was no suspense. The board approved the restructuring unanimously. Caleb was removed from executive authority effective immediately. But I wasn't finished. "I have one more proposal," I said. The room stilled. "Termination is easy," I said. "So is prosecution. But neither repairs what was broken." I looked directly at my son. "I am offering a conditional path forward." Caleb's head snapped up. "Caleb will remain with the company," I said. "Not as an executive, but as an employee, starting on the production floor." Shock rippled through the room. "He will earn back trust through competence, humility, and accountability," I continued. "Or he will leave." No applause. No objections. Just acceptance. After the meeting, the room emptied slowly. Caleb stayed. When we were alone, he spoke. "You planned this for months?" he said quietly. "Yes." "You knew I'd fall for it." "I knew you wouldn't look down," I replied. "You never do." His jaw tightened. "I hated feeling invisible," he admitted. "Overshadowed." "So you tried to erase me?" I asked softly. Silence. "I didn't mean—" "I know," I said. "But intentions don't undo impact." Weeks passed. Caleb showed up. Every day. On time. No favors. No shortcuts. The production floor didn't care who he used to be. Only what he could do. At first, resentment clung to him like static. Then fatigue replaced it. Then slowly, respect. He learned the language of work again. Not numbers. People. One afternoon, I watched from above as he struggled with a component Elena had mastered decades ago. She didn't correct him immediately. She let him fail. Then she showed him how to listen with his hands. Something shifted. At the summer scholarship ceremony, he stood beside me, not as a leader, but as a witness. And for the first time in a long time, I saw him looking outward instead of upward. Later that evening, he asked quietly, "Do you think Dad would be disappointed?" I thought of my husband's voice. No, I think he'd be relieved, because real legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. And for the first time, my son had begun. People think power announces itself loudly. They imagine slammed doors, raised voices, dramatic ultimatums. They imagine victory speeches and public humiliation. What they rarely understand is that real power is quiet. It waits. It watches. And when it finally moves, it does so with intention. My son learned that the hard way. Months after that board meeting, life at the company found a new rhythm. Profits stabilized. Trust returned. The pension fund was not only restored, but strengthened. Employees walked a little taller, knowing their work was finally protected by leadership that saw them not as numbers, but as people. And Caleb? He kept showing up, not because I forced him to, not because he had no other options, but because something in him had finally cracked open. The illusion that leadership was inherited, that respect was automatic, that success came without accountability. Some mornings I'd see him leaving the production floor with grease on his sleeves and exhaustion in his eyes, and I'd think about the boy he used to be. The one who asked too many questions. The one who wanted to build things just to see if he could. That boy hadn't disappeared. He'd just been buried under entitlement. We never went back to the way things were, and we never will. Our relationship changed permanently. There are conversations we haven't had yet, apologies that haven't fully formed, trust that's still fragile, still rebuilding one honest day at a time. This isn't a fairy tale ending. It's something better. It's real. I learned something too. I learned that love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's permission. Permission for resentment to grow. Permission for entitlement to take root. Permission for someone you love to become someone you no longer recognize. Standing up to my son was the hardest decision of my life. Harder than negotiating any contract. Harder than burying my husband. Harder than reclaiming a company that had my fingerprints all over it long before anyone noticed. But it was necessary. Because legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you protect while you're still here. If you're watching this and thinking about your own family, your own sacrifices, your own moments of being underestimated or taken for granted, let me say this clearly. It is never too late to reclaim your voice. It is never too late to draw a boundary. And it is never too late to remind the world and the people closest to you that strength doesn't fade with age. It sharpens. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand your ground with someone you loved? Did it change your relationship or save it? Stay with us. Stories like this aren't about revenge. They're about awakening. And the next one, it goes even deeper.